Thank you very much, Alex, for this great presentation. İkinci projemiz YAS Hotel projesi. Arup grubun aydınlatma tasarımını yaptığı projede hem çok inovatif bir LED kullanımı var. İlk defa üretilen, bu projeye özel üretilen armatürlerle çözülmüş özel bir proje. Brian Stacy, Arup grubun Amerika kıtasındaki aydınlatma tasarım bölümünün başında. Kendisi biraz bu F1 macerasını paylaşacak. Ayakta kalanlar için çok tekrar özür diliyorum. Kusura bakmayın. Keyifli seyirler.
Good evening. I'm Brian Stacy with that lengthy introduction. Thank you guys for having me. Oop. Is that a little bit better? There we go. All right. I was the project director for Arup, who oversaw the YAS Hotel project. One of the things to understand about the YAS project, which is kind of a part of this title, is it really was kind of a race to the finish. Now, for those that might not be familiar with Formula One, and I'm assuming most here have some inclination, it's all about speed. It's all about precision. It is all about image. And this particular image was one that at the competition stage in November of 2007, and yes, competition stage, and time becomes a constant theme here that we'll be discussing as we go through, because these helmets had to be on the racetrack for November of 2009. Now, what was important about this is the dichroic glass, or the dichroic sun shield, as part of that. That, as an image, was one that really captured inspiration for the overall project. Now, I'll come back to that in a second, but first, some orientation. The project has a Formula One racetrack that runs all around and underneath through the hotel. Originally, this hotel was only going to be a single tower, and the developers had the good wisdom to understand that a simple tower in the design that they had, albeit was going to be a nice design, they needed a stronger collaboration to create a much stronger visual appearance, if you will, almost an instant icon associated with it. And this centerpiece was going to become the YAS Hotel. Now, if you go back to that image that we just showed of the racing helmet, of Schumacher's helmet, the idea at competition was to take that dichroic coating and create this sleek veil of glass over top of what was not only one tower, but take it, repeat it again, put it and hover it over top of the water, stretching across to be able to connect the two. And did we say that this was the idea in November 2007? And we have to have it designed and built for November 2009. So we had a little less than 2 years to get everything together. But this particular image was one that, from the word go, there was a collaboration between the architects, the structural engineers, us as lighting designers, as well as all of the other consultants. Some were just getting their feet wet as things really started to get going in January of '08. So I'm just going to give everyone a little bit of a diagram. Working for a good engineering firm, we love diagrams, but wanted to be able to just outline it here in simple bar chart for you. Now, we wish all of this kind of went across initially as we hoped, from the design stage into some of these test stages and some of the initial fab stages, but life happens along the way. Now, to understand how one takes and builds $500 million worth of construction, designs it, engineers it, and builds it in less than 2 years, this diagram works to just attempt to organize all of the different people involved. In reality, what we ended up with were, we ended up with lines that went from us to Traxon EQ and back again as a major contributor to the overall process. Cooper lighting up to Wagner Bureau. It's not every day you'd be able to connect a luminaire manufacturer and a grid and a facade contractor, but because of the complexity of the light fixtures, because of the complexity of the geometries, it was important, or as important, to be able to connect a manufacturer of steel and glass with a lighting manufacturer, who then all came back down to Gary Technologies. And as we went through, we started to see lots of connections happen in organic ways that meant that a traditional, simple diagram to be able to organize a team became, shall we say, irrelevant. And it became about getting the job done. Now, as we think about a project of this scale and this magnitude, one of the things about being able to think about the nighttime image for us was a critical component. These are images that we worked on with the architect, with the renderers, with the structural. A lot of mental capital was put into these. A lot of hard work was put into it. But one of the key ideas was to pick up, is to be able to pick up an outline at the landscape level, to pick up this idea of racing stripes, and to be able to have these as very low level, very pronounced scribes of light that go throughout the whole site, to be able to identify it, so that as you come in, it creates a very clear diagram of where you can go and where you cannot associated with this. But that was the day, that this image is at night. The nighttime image is important. The daytime image, we also had to be thinking about, what does the driver see? So rather than the occupant from the inside of the hotel, we had a very unique issue. You here are coming around the turn and about ready to go underneath the building. And these studies be able to look at where is the sun in the sky and what's reflecting off that building, this potential shiny building. If you're coming into a turn at about 200 to 300 kilometers an hour, the last thing you need is a lot of glare. So these sort of studies helped us to be able to refine some of the geometries with the grid shell glass, meaning that we ended up looking at panel rotation in and along the way. Now, as we look at some of the grid shell components, we know that the dichroic glass was one that, through some mock-up with the owners, they were concerned that you wouldn't get to see through it. And that, let's see if we can get this to go again. You'll notice on your right, perforations started to come into the design language. We also started to rotate some of these panels through to be able to deal with some of those glare issues. And we started to look at those different positions for glare, not only to think about the driver, but also to be able to think about what happens with the view through. So we started to rotate these panels a little bit in some of our physical models that we were doing. You'll also see the fact that this dichroic glass is still here in very geometric and a very clean form. Keep that in mind for later. As we started to go through the design process, we started to look at how do we be able to light these panels? Are we lighting them from one fixture that's going to be able to light on all sides, one that's only lighting asymmetrically, and starting to be able to think about what is this as a product? How does this light fixture need to be able to put light out, as well as how does it look on the facade? This becomes a major feature of the facade. It's not something to be taken lightly, considering the number of these fixtures. We did look at what would happen if they were on the front. We also looked at what happened if they were on the back. We studied both scenarios behind here. Ultimately, we did end up with a front-facing position through the use of mock-up. Everyone loves mock-up. And this is one where we have 12 different pieces of glass, including some dichroic glass up inside of here. And pretty much everything in between, all the way down to just a simple low-E coating. This was actually one that I was pretty excited about from the first workshop that we had at Wagner Bureau's headquarters in Austria, which is, it's just simple low-E coating with a simple frit pattern. Okay, it's custom, it's a radial pattern, it's gradiated, very elegant from the inside, so it picks up some of the visual language. But at the same time, it gave us something to light. But it didn't obstruct the view in the same way as that heavy dichroic glass, even though that has a 50% perforation pattern associated with it. For those interested in the actual guts of and the insides of what ended up in the final light fixture from Cooper Lighting, we had originally, in the design intent, thought we would have multiple heads here with light fixtures, and that we would just take those and stack them to create, if we had panels that got bigger, we would stack them to create more light. What we realized very quickly is that the timing, the risks associated with getting the numbers of those wrong or more moving parts on site, as we started to look at it from a risk analysis, and risk in this time being how much time it would take, what we found that was actually better for us was having a simple luminant diffuser. It's a film that allows us to be able to take light and shape it from a very small beam to something very wide. And by the simple ability to be able to have fixtures that had basically a different beam spread, we were able to deal with all the variant sizes of glass that ended up onto the grid shell. So you saw some of those earlier renders, and one day we were tooling around the YAS Hotel website because for a while, all it had was, don't know if you can see it, but something not unlike this, except this is going up. For a while, we had a countdown clock on the YAS Hotel circuit that basically was counting down in hundredths of a second down to race day. So to actually see this image go up meant that that's what we were delivering. We were basically creating an icon that had to be worked during the day with the drivers as they were going through into the night, so that it wouldn't be able to be washed out by all of the sports lighting associated with it. A strategy of control. Now, another diagram, and I'm sorry, I'm falling back on some of my design and engineering roots here, in loving the diagram to help simplify kind of important components. But the control system for this project, it really makes it in so many ways. It allows for us to have the ability to interface with it, program it. The software application suite that was highly customized for us by EQ allowed us to create an authoring environment unlike others that were, and to our understanding, are kind of available for what we're looking to do with the video component of the control system. And then lastly, to developing some interfaces that I would, if you are thinking about having LED on your projects, I would seriously think about how you're controlling and what kind of information you're getting back from your light fixtures so that you can save them, particularly in an environment here like Istanbul. So, a piece of documentation like this, we all have Excel sheets inside of our daily lives. They tell us a lot of information. They're really, really good at being able to organize lots of data. Now, one of the elements that, as we were going through some of the modeling work, we realized that each fixture was going to be on a different size panel. Well, what happens when you put the same size light on a different size panel? It's going to look brighter, right? So we developed this idea of being able to set individual trim sizes, basically setting a maximum amount of light that goes out for that light fixture, so you can control it so that when you say put all of your lights up on full, it has an algorithm to be able to do that adjustment for you, so that they look uniform across, and in this case, the grid shell. So by implementing that in the control system, it allowed us to be able to help smooth out some of the visual hotspots that we were getting across the grid shell. So as far as a control strategy, we had this idea of this pixel. We've done pixels before on many other projects. We've done projects with 280, 300,000 pixels before. This is relatively simple. Each one of these pixels on the grid shell represented by one of these diamonds. In some instances, they happen to be 500 millimeter, relatively small. In other instances on the grid shell, particularly down and around, there's some that are up to 2.8 meters. Pretty tall pixels. 1.8 meters. Still, pretty tall pixels. So to be able to have one light fixture that could light either a very small pixel or a very wide pixel meant that a lot had to go into how we controlled every single one of those lights. Now, that meant that every light fixture had a DMX address. This is a lighting protocol. Some of you will know it as a theatrical lighting protocol to be able to control LEDs. It's something that we took it and knew that it was starting to be able to give us some feedback in terms of using this control signal to allow so that if one of these fixtures is starting to get too hot, it feeds back to the control system. We'll get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. But the idea that the wiring for every one of these fixtures, this blue line indicates how we wired to every fixture, and to be able to deal with what ended up being over 40 universes of DMX. sorry. One final thought while I'm here on this, on this particular slide. This is a screenshot out of the lighting control software. This is one that was the actual physical model of the grid shell in three-dimensional coordinates with every light on it. So instead of going over, and if for some of you who may have dealt with theatrical lighting consoles, you know you have maybe the lights that are on me at channels 1 through 5, and maybe some of the other lights over to the side walls are on channels 10 through 20 over there, and 30 through 40 over there. But to be able to have them in 3 dimensions allowed us a great deal of flexibility down the road. So hold that in your thought for a moment. As you're sitting and looking at this 3-dimensional model, what this is you're inside of the visualizer of the model. Now, this isn't something from Autodesk. That's inside of a program designed to put out photorealistic renderings. What this is designed to do is control lights. So my joke that I like is it's a pretty complex light switch for most people. But the reason it was needed to be this complex is inside of this 3-dimensional model here, we've started to map video content that we generated, which I'll get to here in a little bit. But we were able to find some issues with this model, where we had some misaddressing here. We have 1 or 2 of the panels that are missing there. So being able to have the ability to go into this. Now, this is all happening pre-site, mind you. There's construction of a big project going on. Meanwhile, we're in New York with the architects. The second time we fired this model up, we brought it up on the screen, we had Hani and we had Lizanne, the architects from Asymptote, there with us to be able to look at visual content on this grid shell, to be able to think about how does the light feel on the sculpture. I keep thinking of this grid shell in a lot of frames as basically a large sculpture. Because it's very easy for a project like this to become a media facade that ends up with logos on it and someone buys ad space on it. So in order for us to keep that at arm's reach away from the project is to develop a visual language and to look at off-site modeling of the content to be able to make sure that we were presenting this as effectively a work of art. Some more of the animations. These are some frames out of some of the studies where we started to look at what the different looks were. Now, this one is always one of my favorites to put up here because, and if Hani were here today, he had this phrase at one point about the grid shell wanting to feel like a slithering skin of a snake. And we took that almost maybe a little too literally, so we created some content, put it up on the model, and the first time he saw this, he said, "I shall never see this on our building ever again." So being able to do this before we got on site inside of our studio back in New York, it saved us a huge amount of time on site, which time on this particular project, it was of the essence, quite literally. Now, all of this content is great to be able to look at. Now, but one of the concerns that we had was, as we're developing this content, how does it map itself to the grid shell? What does it look like? So this is the actual resolution of the grid shell in terms of the number of pixels, give or take 1 or 2 pixels on the top and at the bottom, depending on how it comes to at the elbow. But it's effectively 40 pixels tall and a few hundred pixels long. Now, when you map that onto the grid shell, this is kind of what you see. Now, I'll play through here one of the animations. This animation's a little bit jerky in here. It's because of one of the codecs we used on the compression schemes. So imagine if it was just a little bit smoother and this went on for, you're seeing what is, in this case, probably took about 20 minutes to work on. Now, we actually kind of sat with the owners for a very long afternoon reviewing animations such as this to be able to look at. And an animation like this, instead of it lasting 20 seconds, would last somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes associated with that. Now, you might say, okay, that's great. You've just developed 7 scenes, 7 important number, right? Well, how do you have these 7 scenes look fresh? Well, we developed a system automation, a series of routines to help so that the content was pulling from different folders, was also overlaying with different color parameters and different speeds. Might seem like a pretty simple task, but we then added a very long process in terms of, remember that data I was talking about from the controls that was feeding back from the lights. If a light gets too hot, that one light fixture can say, hey, I'm too hot, control system. I need to be able to be reduced. Now, the system automation allowed these logic settings to understand if a section of the grid shell gets too warm in terms of the LED operating temperature is too hot. It then starts to dim down a portion of the grid shell. And it will then have the logic to be able to dim down even more. The reason for this, LEDs really don't like heat. For those that know that well, you think, well, then why'd you do an LED project in one of the hottest places on Earth? Well, we were able to use DMX RDM, that lighting control protocol, to be able to be one of our many safety nets associated with this. So that, going back a little ways, you can kind of get a sense of what this test strip looked like. And when we put this against the computer model, it all looked great. Why am I just kind of a little relieved? We didn't have much time on site to be able to deal with this. To put it in perspective, while all of that other work was happening, this is a sense of what the project site was starting to look and feel like here. So you still had ladders going in. You can see you've got wires hanging off the back. It's a construction site with literally thousands and thousands of people working on this one project in basically 6 days, maybe 7 days at some point, 2 shifts, day and night. So they had a deadline. They had to meet it. This gives a sense of what it looked like in the 28th of June, 2009. At this point, there's July, August, September, October, really before the race, 4 months. And you can see how much construction is still happening here. Lots of glass panels still not in. Yes, the marina was flooded, but still plenty of construction happening on site. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit here. This is a picture from 2008. This was a time when our friends at EQ were able to kind of get involved into the project a little early on. This puts it a little bit in perspective, how far they've come from here at 2008 to that shots that we just saw in 2009. Jumping ahead a little later, now, part of the overall sequencing of this project is the racetrack already was in place when the hotel went in many locations. They basically built the racetrack and then covered it up for protection. So here in April of 2009, they're starting to be able to expose components of the track. Well, why? A track needs to get seasoned. Someone's going to have to start running race cars on this for a couple months to be able to literally lay rubber on top of that racetrack. So still June, quite literally, large sections of the grid shell still being flown in, scaffolding. The grid shell's still not propped up under its own weight. It has all of the scaffolding associated with it. Meanwhile, we're still in New York. All of those sequences that you saw, we're still going through those. We spent months and months and months with Asymptote, ourselves, back and forth with the owner to try to be able to work through what these 7 scenes were. Now, it's a dusty place, and those who know electronics electronics don't really like a lot of dust associated with it. They like to be in air-conditioned control rooms, specifically thinking about our control system that was really the heart of this. And we were lucky that by the middle of October, we at least had things in racks, but at the same time, we still had wires that were lying around. We still had other pieces of equipment like scaffolding that were hitting up next to these control racks. All of this to say, it was not an ideal environment. We just made it, people were able to make it work. My friend Jan loves this photo because this is the day that the air conditioning arrived for the lighting control system. Now, put it in perspective, we're a couple weeks away from the race. We've already been doing troubleshooting. We've already been looking at all these scenes on the grid shell at some point in time. And finally, the air conditioning is starting to arrive. Not installed, but arrives. So that's the heart of the system. Looks like a lot of other equipment rooms you might see to a certain degree. This is really kind of a story of what's under the hood, just like a Formula One race car. That engine inside of a Formula One race car is really powerful and impressive, and is pushed to the limit. This control system does very much the same thing in a lot of ways. As we're going through the kind of the fine-tuning phase, some of this we had to do remotely. These are images that the architect shot for us and these quite literally just from a simple point-and-shoot camera that allowed us to remotely be able to look at and say, oh, is that an issue with the DMX channel? We're zooming in here a little bit. Nope, that's actually an issue with the light. And to be able to keep that collaboration with our site architect, who's sitting in Abu Dhabi, we're sitting in New York, and having this daily back and forth as collaboration was critical in terms of being able to get the overall project done on time. Now, just a shot from the inside. Right now, there's a nice bar that's here. Nice leather chairs, and where these particular gentlemen are, you're looking straight down onto the racetrack at that point with it running underneath. But this kind of helps give you a sense of the scale that we were dealing with. And to keep in perspective, some of these grid shell panels, these are only like 1/2 meter to 3/4 of a meter grid shell panels. So another way to put it, this is the small section of the grid shell. Brightness review. That one little car was incredibly loud. You could hear him when he was on the other side of the track, 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers away. But he literally, a version of that car was running around the track while we were doing a lot of fine-tuning work to be able to, as I said earlier about laying rubber underneath this. But literally, the other thing we were also very concerned about, we had to go up and we were very concerned about this, because this race was going from day into night, about having the grid shell such that it had enough light and enough legibility to it. And considering we're up against over 1,000 lux, we are in pretty good shape. It performed much better than everyone thought it ultimately would be. But as a part of that, we started to look at the content. The content review was this process that was one that we wish we had more time with, but we knew that all of those months that we spent with Asymptote working ahead of this day meant that the 2 hours we had with the CEO of Aldar to go through content meant that we were able to cycle through over 2.5 gigabytes worth of video content in a very short period of time to go through things with him. To be able to pick up the nuances of when little purple patches were moving. Are those purple patches a little too purple? Do they need to be more green? Nothing. We looked at all of this on screen and in email. Nothing beats the real thing. Just like the mock-ups that we saw earlier from that gorgeous project that with those metal panels. Same thing, nothing beats the real thing at the end of the day. So, I'm going to take a step over for a moment. Why is the control system such a critical component in my opinion? It did a lot of things for us in terms of it was able to look at fixtures and report back to them. It was able to look on a macro level, on a big scale, to look at the overall system condition, if things were being able to be operating correctly. It was sharing information about the condition of the lighting system, right down to an email that you were able to get. Now, in that email would give you how much energy was used, what lamps were out, are there problems with any of the control gear. But even all this advanced system monitoring, the one thing that we started from the word go, and I would say if there's a takeaway here tonight, is advanced monitoring, it doesn't replace maintenance procedures, particularly as we're dealing with LED installations. They have great hopes in terms of longevity, how long a lifespan they have. 50,000 hours, it's really enticing. Things still need to be maintained, and I would ask you to make sure you have that conversation with your clients and your building owners about needing to have an appropriate maintenance procedure associated with it. Let's see if this will, there we go. So on the Monday morning after the race, I woke up at the hotel, flipped on CNN International, had an amazing day watching cars go by. We kind of knew the outcome of the race before it had even started because this field was pretty close that year. Not really. And we see this little ad on here on CNN International. What we hadn't realized is that this was the beginning of an ad campaign. This one ad and similars like it were the beginning of an ad campaign for Abu Dhabi that lasted 6 months. It was basically Abu Dhabi's planting a flag in their little part of the world to say, hi, we're here, we're an international grade city, we have wonderful things to be able to come and experience and to be able to see associated with it. We've got great architecture, we have our own icon, and we have something that we're sure you'll all love to be able to go and visit. So with that, I say thank you and adieu.
Thank you very much, Brian. Geldiğiniz için, dinlediğiniz için, bizi yalnız bırakmadığınız için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Umut ediyorum bu ve bunun gibi etkinliklerde yine bir arada oluruz. Çok sağ olun, ayağınıza sağlık.